Welcome to our presentation entitled, A Review of the Behavioral Factors Influencing the Housing Market. I am Bachar Fakhri, an independent academic author specializing in behavioral economics. My co-author is John Paul Amani, an assistant professor at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, specializing in financial market efficiency. The paper is part of a comprehensive research analysing the behaviour of householders and buyers in the UK's housing market. We will open with an introduction section on the importance and a brief overview of the UK's housing market. We will then critically review the behavioural factors influencing householders and buyers. Next, we will evaluate the impact of a crisis on the behaviour of householders and buyers. Finally, we will end with a summary and conclusion on the housing market. Barker 2005 argued that housing is a fundamental right. Householders generally buy houses for residential purposes. Additionally, houses are critical for households' well-being, stability and wealth. As Benito et al. 2006 state, the housing market is critical for the economy. According to estate agent Savills, the UK's market was worth £8.4 trillion or 3.7 times the UK's GDP in 2021. Moreover, according to the Bank of England, the total outstanding mortgages against the housing market was £1.6 trillion or 70% of GDP as of July 2022. As Barker 2005 states, houses form 50% of household assets. Furthermore, householders spent 3.7% of GDP on homes. Additionally, household consumption and debt are generally positively linked to house prices. The primary literature contribution to housing markets is the psychological and neurological explanation of decision-making in the housing market. However, behavioral economics has previously been used to describe psychological factors, but not in such depth. Moreover, there is a requirement to include neuroeconomics to explain the decision-making process fully. In providing the basis for an empirical study, we aim to extend the paper using the Fakhri 2021 model to analyze housing market stability. It is essential to study the behavioral factors underpinning any decision. Moreover, the research is essential since householders often cannot separate psychological factors and emotions from decision-making. Furthermore, Levy and Glimcher 2012 illustrated that the brain considers the context of the decision, giving rise to environmental differences influencing the behavior. Thus, hinting at the brain reacting differently to bubbles and crises. The difference between householders and market participants is essential. Householders generally buy houses for residency and show positive emotions when they find the property. Thus, householders fall in love with the property. Additionally, the house is the critical inheritance asset between the intergeneration. However, this is becoming less significant with the equity release schemes used to maintain a lifestyle or help their children buy a house. Nevertheless, many householders have awakened to the prospect of houses as long-term investments based on the fallacy that a house never loses its value. There is a logical argument for the fallacy, especially in some areas like London. The housing market has been strong since the mid-1980s due to the listed factors on the slide. This fallacy led to a paradigm shift in the 1990s from a house primarily as a home to a long-term investment asset. Simply put, financialisation is the growth of the financial sector to hugely influence the economy. The idea was developed in the USA and enveloped the UK in the 1980s. Stagnation and relatively high inflation affected the real economy throughout the 1960s and 70s. Additionally, the movement of the population to the cities and the urbanisation of the economy meant that cities like London grew in structure and influence. Financialisation led to the mortgage market's securitization during the 1990s, leading to the deviation into primary and secondary markets, allowing mortgage companies to pass the risk on to investment companies through highly complicated and risky financial assets, such as mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations. Many invested in these assets owing to the high return and perceived low risk due to the fallacy. The securitization allowed mortgage lenders to innovate and lend to subprime borrowers. Generally, mortgage crises occur when policy change leads to high systematic risk. The 2008 mortgage crisis occurred because of a change in the monetary policy to tackle inflationary pressures. Therefore, leading to a hike in defaults and stagnated or falling house prices. Thus, the securitized mortgage market became illiquid, leaving many investment companies in a financial crisis. Modern economics dictates that householders decide on housing options by maximizing utility and choosing the optimal housing option given all possible information. The property search does not matter, as preferences were explained and markets were in equilibrium. Given these statements, modern economics successfully explained the housing market until recently. However, there were weaknesses in the modern economic approach. Chiefly householders, like most humans, are Homo sapiens and not Homo economicus reacting to fundamentals. Moreover, householders sometimes opt for the most satisfactory house. Additionally, The search process is significant because information is primarily ex ante. And importantly, to understand the housing market, there is a need for psychological factors. As Whittle et al. 2014 note, there was limited literature on the impact of behavioral factors before the 2008 financial crisis. The 2008 financial crisis brought to the front the psychological factors affecting and distorting house prices. Householders were affected by cognitive and emotional biases and heuristics like other market participants. Moreover, householders displayed several characteristics of Keynes' 1936's animal spirit. Furthermore, Simon 1972 argued that decisions were more likely to be bounded rationality than rationality. As Dunning 2017 implies, bounded rationality is akin to a trial and error method in the housing search. Influenced by the seminal papers of Gallman and Tversky, the central concept behind behavioral economics is that decision-makers are Homo sapiens, not Homo economicus. As Bin and Baruch put it, what is important in market fluctuations are not the events themselves but the human reactions to those events. Furthermore, humans generally underreact to single events but overreact to a series of linked events, bad or good. A key element of behavioral economic theory is the prospect theory introduced by Gallman and Tversky over two papers in 1979 and 1992 to overcome the certainty and isolation effects of the rational expectation model. The prospect theory dictates that decision-makers choose among varying prospects by the perceived likelihood of all the prospects. Moreover, the prospect theory relies on the four listed psychological characteristics. A critical factor is that houses are psychological status reflecting on the self-image of householders. Thus, householders often display extreme emotions. Moreover, psychological factors frequently sway householders' decisions. Additionally, householders are often influenced by animal spirit behavior, where householders move in a similar direction during a downturn or upturn in the market. Critically, householders are reference point dependent, meaning householders evaluate gains and losses according to a reference point. The reference point could be the purchase price or a house in the neighborhood. Householders often use a false reference point, where the reference price is set too high, making them loss averse. They consider any price below the reference point a loss when they are making a considerable profit. Moreover, householders demand more than they are willing to pay for the house, displaying the endowment effect. Two psychological factors affect decision-making. The cognitive effect is a deliberate, intentionally slow control system, while the emotional effect is an automatic and fast system. Implying that householders follow their gut when buying, selling a property before considering the decision, this feeling becomes the basis for the decision, usually justifying it with false cognition. There are two psychological factors which could lead to the wrong decision. Heuristics are simplifying methods to overcome the brain's constant information overload. They are based on assumptions, such as neighborhood prices. However, heuristics could be based on falsified assumptions, which leads to wrong decisions. Biases are a disproportionate probability in favor or against critical information leading to the wrong decision. Cognitive biases limit the ability to encode, process, and retrieve information. In contrast, emotional biases are the inability to separate emotions from decision-making. Our paper has identified many psychological factors shaping the housing market. We will concentrate on 16 psychological factors. Nevertheless, this is still too many to consider within the time confine of the presentation, so we will select a few to give an idea of the impact of psychological factors on the housing market. As highlighted on the slide, we selected two of each: heuristics, cognitive and emotional biases. We will pause for a few seconds to view all the psychological factors. Note that the 6 selected psychological factors are: heuristics, most familiar region and negative factor association; cognitive, illusion of control and status quo; and emotional, pride and regret. Many householders suffer from 2 heuristics, most familiar region and negative factor association. These psychological factors are deeply ingrained within the brain, automatically activated when the property search is initiated, leading to the householders rejecting or favoring certain regions without noticing. Once under the illusion of control, householders may act with an open mind regarding the property search, but unknowingly, the brain has narrowed the search at the initiation. The most familiar region is the tendency for householders to choose the familiar and not the optimal region, associated with the familiarity bias stating that people tend to go with the most familiar object. However, another explanation is regret aversion, where householders choose to go with the familiar region rather than regret moving to another region. Therefore, they could miss out on the optimal house for their needs. The other heuristic is the negative factor association, which dictates that householders tend to dismiss properties that historically have been linked with negative factors. Bad news stays far longer than good news, even if the region is now one of the best. The underlying factors are conservatism, bias and fear. Once negativity enters the brain, fear of the region is activated, which means the region is forever damned. The conservatism bias means that if the region is upclassed, the brain updates the negativity factor slowly. Again, the householder could miss out on the optimal house. Occasionally householders suffer from an illusion of control bias, where they overestimate their ability to control events, leading them to misprice risk or make decisions not within the primary objective. Due to the endowment effect and loss aversion, householders tend to fall to the status quo, dictating that, under some situations, householders tend to maintain their current position, even if the alternative offers better options. Pride and regret have potentially the most significant emotional impact on householders. As in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, pride is a double-edged sword, hubristic implying disdain and authentic implying achievement. Authentic pride householders suffer from self-attribution, where householders attribute failure to external factors and successes to their abilities. Hubristic pride occasionally leads to the disposition effect, dictating that householders tend to act too fast on profits and slow on losses. Fear of regret is often a critical negative emotion felt by householders. Regret is the tendency to harbor negative feelings due to comparing the real-world outcome with those of an idealized world. There are two states of regret. Householders could regret buying, selling, or not buying, selling a house. As Mark Twain says, we regret the things we don't do more than the things we do. Moreover, as the old quote goes, fear is temporary, regret lasts forever. Thus, many householders develop regret aversion, fearing making mistakes and opting for the status quo. Neuroeconomics provided new insights into the reactions of householders. A combination of neuroscience and economics feeds into an in-depth understanding of the brain's workings. Conversely, the brain works differently for each market activity, meaning that the brain treats the selling and buying of a house differently. Two conflicting theories exist regarding the brain's workings in economics: dual system economists and single system neuroscientists. Central to the conflict is whether a dual positive and negative system with specialized emotional and cognitive regions or a single system with no specialized regions within the context dictates decisions. In a famous interview in Sture Quarter Ellen Zaloom 2011, Paul Glimcher comments, "But it's actually one person. So what does that mean? There are two people inside that person?" Richard Thaler replied, "Well, maybe there really are two people inside that person, a circumflex euro, who knows? The brain is a strange thing." This interview is the crux of the argument between neuroscientists and economists. Interestingly, the dual system points to a battle between the two brain systems for control of resources. Hence, the added incentive for the quote, "in two minds." The battle is cognitive versus effects and controlled versus automated. The emotional automated system reacts faster than the cognitive controlled system, so many householders tend to make decisions using the heart instead of their head. During a crisis, there is an increase in serotonin neurotransmitter activities which essentially indicates danger. However, dopamine neurotransmitter activities are increased during a bubble, indicating pleasure levels, hence the quote from Gordon Gekko in the movie Wall Street, "Greed is good." However, neuroscientists believe there is no justification for the dual system. Essentially, the brain reacts to the surrounding environment. Whether the decision is made in the boom or bust dictates the decision. During a crisis, householders are increasingly uncertain and fearful. However, during a bubble, householders are overexcited and dismissive of all information to the contrary. Both systems result in increased fear leading to panic during crises, and greed leading to arrogance during bubbles. As elegantly put by Banerjee 1992, in many situations, humans' decisions are influenced by others' actions. Herding in economics was first derived by Keynes 1936, observing that agents often display animal spirit during periods of high uncertainty, herding together at any sight of danger. He argued that herding behavior was the product of uncertainty and limited information. Moreover, as Mackey 1941 says, "Men, it has been well said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly, and one by one." During economic upturns, news regarding the housing market drives the herding momentum, pushing up prices in the housing market. This momentum towards higher prices attracts new householders to join the herds, inducing the positive feedback effect. However, during a massive negative impact, such as a crisis, news on the housing market drives the downward herding momentum, pushing prices down. As the price decreases, others join the herding momentum, inducing an opposite positive feedback effect. A positive feedback effect is where price increases, decreases, increase herd momentum, pushing prices higher, lower. As contrary news, good or bad, filters in, the negative feed effect kick in, meaning householders gradually drop out of the herd, and hence, prices gradually move to the supposedly fundamental price. A housing market bubble is a period of rapid growth in the housing market where houses consistently rise above the fundamental value. The efficient market hypothesis declares that the fundamental value of houses should reflect all available information and news. Hence, during a bubble, house prices are not justified by the information at the time. Herding dictates that an increase in the housing market would lead to more households joining the market, further exacerbating the bubble. Conversely, bubbles are a frequent occurrence in the housing market. A housing market bubble in the US mainly caused the financial crisis of 2008. More importantly, data from the Land Registry in the UK point to a 389% increase between January 1990 and March 2023, backing the MIS's 2012 claims about bubbles in the UK. Since the fundamental information cannot explain this statistic, many householders were underreacting to fundamental information in an attempt to get in on the action. However, there is a misconception concerning fundamentals within the housing market. In some cities and regions, like London, demand will always be high, therefore keeping prices high. So, although theoretically, many analysts and policymakers could point to a bubble in these areas, there might not be one. Conversely, as we have seen in many episodes of asset price crashes, these high price expectations driving bubbles are never permanent. Put simply, there comes a time when an inflated bubble will deflate or burst due to a change in the environment. Essentially, a change in economic policy, that is rising interest rates or new tax, or a drastic downgrade of household fundamentals, that is rising unemployment or decreasing income, shifts household expectations. However, as highlighted previously, this implies that many householders will opt for the status quo, meaning a stagnated housing market. We will discuss the psychological impact of a crisis in the following slides. There are two definitions of a crisis. Friedman and Schwartz's 1963 give a narrow definition of a crisis as a banking panic leading to money supply contraction, whereas Minsky 1972 and Kindleberger 1978 provide a wider bound description of a crisis as a financial calamity involving any combination of these four events. We opt for the second definition because most recent crises were due to any number of these events combined. Since 2007, as listed on the screen, 5 major crises have involved these events in the UK. There has been limited research on the psychology and neuroscience of householders during a crisis. However, as argued by Marsh and Gibb 2011, all economic agents' financial decisions are based on similar psychological factors. Furthermore, a healthy brain is similarly wired in all humans. We could assume the same factors apply to all market participants. However, how these factors play out may differ. A key factor in play is the amplification mechanism, which states that as the velocity of negative news increases, fear among householders also increases. Occasionally, this fear leads to loss aversion and eventually to the status quo bias. In addition, householders find it difficult to accept a lower price than the false reference point, mainly due to the positive emotions, even falling in love, they show towards their homes. So it is hard to accept that their home sold for less than the false reference point. These cognitive and emotional factors mean that, in some cases, the housing market could hold its price well during a crisis. However, not all crises have a positive impact on the housing market. At the heart of any crisis is unbounded fear, making householders act without consciousness. Thus, fear changes householders' behavior during a crisis, as illustrated by the graph, from an upward positive emotional curve to a downward negative emotional curve. Hence, this leads to a strategic change in the householders' plans as the velocity of the crisis increases. There are some glaring issues in our understanding of neuroscience during a crisis. Due to many of the householders' decisions being done by the brain's automated processes, there is a tendency for householders to suffer from an illusion of control. The danger is that the automated process might lead to a decision that is out of context during a crisis, wrongly thinking the decision considered all the information. Moreover, the brain may decide to postpone gratification until after the crisis. Since many householders need to sell before buying, there is the danger of missing the whole picture by focusing on one piece of the jigsaw. Generally, during a crisis, the brain is in two minds, cognitions versus emotions and fear versus greed. Sellers tend to be emotionally connected to their house, while buyers are more cognitively rational. The householders are more fearful of selling their house during a crisis, and hence presumably, the brain regions that deal with emotions are more active, especially the amygdala region associated with fear. As the crisis intensifies, the increase in activities in the amygdala region would explain why many householders tend to withdraw from their decision to sell their house. It also explains why previously rational householders panic and postpone the house hunt when their income or wealth is threatened. The single system posits that the brain's negative activities increase as the context changes. However, the dual system alludes to the automated emotional, irrational system increasingly overpowering the brain as the crisis intensifies. Both systems seem to hint at a change in the regions and activities in the brain as the crisis intensifies, leading to householders re-evaluating their decision-making process with negative consequences. Summarizing the paper, we reviewed the behavioral factors influencing the housing market, both psychological and neurosciences. In particular, we evaluated the psychology and neuroscience of decision-making during crises and bubbles. Furthermore, we recognized that the UK's housing market could not be fully understood without referencing the financialisation process. The review unearthed some glaring issues in the housing market literature since buyers and sellers are basically Homo sapiens. Therefore, many suffer from cognitive and emotional biases and heuristics. Hence the lack of research in this area is glaringly apparent. One should not count on the psychology and neuroscience of market participants to understand the householders. This paper initially intended to analyze the stability of the UK housing market using the model of Thackeray 2021. Thus, the next step in the paper is to add the stability model using a timeframe analysis to understand how the householders account for a change in the market context. Our paper highlights the importance of policymakers accounting for the behavioral factors in the housing market. The fact that the housing market is a pivotal contributor to volatility in the economy in many crises means that it cannot be ignored. In essence, monetary policy should be able to react to the housing market. Hope you enjoyed the presentation and will read and enjoy our paper. Enjoy the rest of the conference.